Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the Aries Stellium that's going to be developing in April and is really going to be characterizing the whole month. This is one of the loudest alignments of the year. So we're going to get into why this is so significant. We'll look at it on this kind of detailed level here. We'll go into what this means for us in terms of the collective energy that we're all experiencing. We'll look at it in terms of the global implications and some predictions there. And then we'll do horoscopes for each sign to see how this is going to be impacting you personally. And that is going to be foremost for your rising sign, because then it will align with the natal whole sign house in your chart that I will be speaking to. But feel free to check out for your sun or your progressed rising sign as well. So let's talk about this on a detailed level. I'm going to throw some dates at you guys, but one thing I will say before I even get into these dates is I wouldn't get too hung up on the particulars. This is really characterizing the whole month. And the date ranges that I would say are most significant are going to be the second half of April and even more particularly around the 14th of April through about the 26th of April. And this is centering especially strongly right around the 20th. And we'll get into why on that in a moment as well. So part of the reason that we're getting such a jumble of planets here, if you haven't noticed, this whole concentration of planets is what we're going to be talking about today, which is a stellium, which is a bunch of different planets that are in one central area of the sky. In our case, it's going to be in Aries, and quite especially in the first 10 degrees or so of Aries. The reason that this is jumbling up so much is that we already have Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Those just moved into this sign permanently in February, and we had the conjunction of those two in February. Now we have the sun moving through, conjoining all these placements, but we also then have Mercury and Mars trailing that. So this is going to be a super, super punchy Aries season that we are already partially in. And of course, we can see this on a global scale as to how that's going to wind up looking. But we have the sun in Aries throughout Aries season, 20th of March to the 19th of April. We will then get Mars hopping into Aries as well. On the 9th of April, it'll stay there till mid-May here. We also then have Mercury jumping in on the 14th of April, and that's going to stay there until the beginning of May. I'll also tell you some dates of the conjunctions. So this is when we have the exact alignments of certain planets. So on the 13th of April, we will have Mars conjunct Neptune. So this planet and that planet will conjoin. On the 17th of April, we will have Mercury conjunct Neptune. So Mercury is trailing, and that will conjunct Neptune. Additionally, on that day, on the 17th, is the date that I am showing here, which is when we have the new moon in Aries. I will kind of briefly touch on that here. I'm going to do a whole separate video on that one as well, because that is a pretty distinctive energy there. On the 19th of April, we have Mars conjunct to Saturn. And then on the 20th of April, the next day, we have Mercury, one right after the other. It will conjoin Saturn and then it will conjoin Mars. So that's why I'm saying right around that like 17th to 20th of April timeframe is super pressurized. But I wouldn't get hung up on any one of these specific conjunctions because it's flavoring the entire period of time that we're talking about. Now, this won't be the most pleasant transit or video, but I am going to try and focus on the collective energies, on actionable advice. So how we should go about that, some of the things that we can lean into, some of the things that we should probably avoid with this. And then at the end of the global notes, which are probably going to be a little bit more rough, there is going to be a little bit of maybe good news at the end of that as well about this alignment. I also just mentioned a lot of this is in the first 10 degrees, a lot of this action that's going on of Aries. And there's a term for that 10 degree section of a given sign. So the first 10 degrees of Aries are very potent. As always, I like to refer to 36 Faces by Austin Coppock to dig into the decan every time we get one emphasized like this. So this is a very primordial space. It is the first degrees of the zodiac, and he refers to it as the axe. So there's this kind of weaponry, machinery aspect to this decan that is probably going to play into this, as we'll see as we get into the global predictions. This also has a lot to do with splitting one thing into multiple things or severing connections, cutting oneself off, trying to be more independent. But it's very willful, and it can wind up leaning into like overkill, overdoing things for sure. So I'm going to quote Austin Coppock here about this decan. So he says there's a tendency in this decan to try to do too much with force alone, not comprehending the subtle cycles of the world. Karmic debts accumulate quickly. So that's why I want to focus on actionable advice for us, and then also point out that going overboard in the way that this is likely to will create a sense of blowback, but it may show up a little bit like instant karma, but it's likely to show up very much at the source of whatever wrong action is being taken. And the reason for that is that notice how all we have here is these blue aspect lines. So these are flowing. They're not really intervening. They're not really getting in the way. And so that's another reason why this is so significant to me, is that there's not a lot that's able to interfere in this in the moment that it's happening, other than what's right there with it. So these conjunctions, they can push up against each other and they can create blowback for each other, but it's likely to be like very close to home that we wind up having issues of blowback. So the vibe of this, it is very Arian. I would say go with like Aries stereotypes, not what you know of Aries people, because they are, I think, much more complete and robust and reasoned than this energy is likely to wind up showing up as. But it is going to have a lot of passion and drive to it. That's one thing that I think would be great if we could lean into a sense of quiet determination to follow our passions in this period of time, because we're likely to be super motivated to that end. This is very argumentative, though, especially once Mercury winds up getting into the mix and this really starts impacting our conversations with people. There's a lot of friction here and a lot of fissure. So splitting things apart, Mars and Saturn do that, Aries does that, and that is especially strong in the first decan. So we have that in spades here, this kind of friction that leads to a splitting apart. This is also highly pressurized. Mars and Saturn are going to bump right up against each other, and that can lead to a big kind of combustible energy or conflagration of energy. Additionally, unfortunately, this is going to show up as violence, anger, hatred, things like this. So we'll get into that a bit as well. I do want to point out, though, that this is going to concentrate in a particular way around 8 degrees of cardinal signs. So I would recommend checking if you have any planets or placements around 8 degrees of Aries, of Cancer, of Libra, or of Capricorn, give or take a couple of degrees, in which case, when it comes to what I'm about to say, I would take it extra seriously, right? So let's talk about this on an energetic level. Collectively, there's so much stop and go energy here, and that can definitely lead to some strain, but there's also, again, this kind of passionate initiative energy here where we're going to feel kind of restless and want to kick things off and want to pour our energy and effort into something that is meaningful to us personally. So this could have us stirred up to act on a dream, maybe even to go our own way in a lot of different aspects of our lives, not looking to others for approval for what we're doing, but following our hearts. With that said, I would definitely recommend slowing down in order to make progress. I wouldn't rush. I would try your best also not to be rash about decision making. There's a potential for accidents, for breakdowns. It's going to be great if we can double check whatever it is we're doing. So saving our work, maybe doing backups of our work onto a cloud, especially once Mercury gets into the mix. We could definitely have some data losses. I wouldn't be speeding. Additionally, when it comes to conversation with other people or exchange, try, if you can, to speak slowly, to speak gently during this period of time. We're likely to feel very restless and impatient. And by we, I do mean we. So not just like in the moment when you're feeling that way, it can feel like I'm feeling this way, and so I need to deal with that. But it's also, I think, important to keep in mind everyone else is also going to be feeling that way. So that's the energy that we're dealing with from others as well. They are also going to be pretty restless and impatient. So you could see how things could wind up snowballing and becoming kind of argumentative or even conflictual if we wind up running up against each other. We may even have some struggle with a lot of motivation, but then running into a weird sense of burnout. We could have some difficulty with timing and energy, our thought processes, our moods as well. So patience is really needed, but again, it's going to be kind of short. So if we can try our best throughout all of April, focus your mantra, on patience, try to be cool-headed about things. And try to manage your own energy too. We could wind up running ourselves into walls, similar to how as Mars is approaching the Saturn, one of the kind of archetypal characteristics of that, or one of the ways that we characterize that, is running straight into a wall, because Saturn is this kind of immovable object and Mars is basically this unstoppable force. So it's very common to run into an energy like that. So that's why I'm saying it's stop go. Because the thing is, Mars isn't going to stop when it runs into that wall. It may be forced to for a moment, but it is going to get stirred up again. And also, it's not going to just be right on the exact conjunction that we feel like we're running into walls and obstacles and things. It's going to be this just energy of the period of time. So I would say when you feel like you are running into something like that, see if you can pivot, see if you can do something a little bit differently, try to be flexible about that. Additionally, if you have a lot of restlessness or you have a lot of mental tension, frustration, try to channel some of that into physical exercise, maybe cleaning or organizing. I would avoid, again, using force. So thinking of it on just a mundane level, if a drawer won't close, it's probably because something's blocking it, right? So maybe try not to just jam it closed because that might break something, and it would break something, under this kind of energy. So try to avoid that impulse to solve things with strength or to solve things with force. Also, when you are exercising, exerting yourself physically, be a little bit extra cautious about physical accidents or injuries or overstrain, overexerting yourself, things like that. Try to gently stretch. Again, a lot of patience is what I'm going to be preaching across the board here. Additionally, leaning into quiet authority. So this is going to bring up a lot of notions of sovereignty, and not just for us personally, but also for others. So instead of trying to control others or trying to push others to do certain things, trying to focus our sense of control on a sense of discipline over our own reactions to things. So try to focus that intensity on like self-regulation and emotional regulation and reactive regulation. So if you feel like there's an outburst that's coming up, if you feel that rush of energy, see if you can disengage, see if you can walk away. Just get some time in between that feeling and action on that feeling, and things should go more smoothly than would otherwise be the case. Authority itself is going to be a major flashpoint, so we're going to need to decide if we need to assert that in some way, which there may be cases that we do need to. If we need to assert some boundaries or something like this, there does need to be a decision made, and I would recommend making it as slowly as you can about whether you're willing to accept the fallout from challenging authority during this period of time. Because yes, it's likely to be effective, but it's also pretty likely to lead to a fissure or a snowballing effect where there's an actual overt conflict that winds up getting stirred up by that. We may even feel pretty anxious or very rushed, like we need to get things done right away. So again, I would try to avoid that. Try to pay attention to if you feel a little bit more anger than usual. If you even maybe feel like it is coming out of nowhere, you're not sure why, it's probably this transit. So I would definitely recommend breathing, take a step back, focus on problem solving and flexibility, because there's not going to be enough of that in the collective energy during this period of time. So someone's going to have to be the adult in the room, right? And for better or worse, that may need to be us. If others are extremely rigid, it's not really going to help the situation if we do that too. Finally, with Mercury in this mix here, I mean, this is such a not so great mix for judgment calls. That Mercury is going to be under the influence of Neptune and both of what we call the malefic planets. So these are complications, complicating factors. Mars tends to go overboard aggressive, and Saturn tends to go overboard constrictive. When you get them together, especially in a very hot sign, a Mars-ruled sign like Aries, the likelihood of being rash and not having all of our facts when we do so is very likely. I will say, in the media, in the public, for better or worse, some people are going to be making some real fools out of themselves. So let's also try maybe not to do that in our own personal lives as well. So, just really god-awful judgment calls are a major risk here. That is one thing that I've been preaching to people on a personal level this whole year around this period of time. If a decision feels like it is urgent, or if you feel angry about it, or you feel the need to rush an issue, it's probably the wrong decision. It's probably some weird kind of bad judgment is in the mix there somewhere. So if you can wait 24 or 48 hours, sleep on it at least before you make a decision like that, where you feel rushed, either by you or by others, that's going to be the way to go. Additionally, with Mercury's involvement with Mars and Saturn in Aries, that does suggest that words will be weapons and that there's a quickness here with Mars and Mercury in the mix to blowback. So it will happen like in the immediate moment there, that kind of instant karma that I have written down here. I would try your best not to be provocative with your language, or at least overly provocative, right? Try not to send heated emails. Try not to be cheeky, about that. This just so is not the time for that. I would also expect censorship or speech crackdowns, things like that. So if we can maybe avoid triggering those things on our own, like personal level, that may be wise. I would also really avoid ultimatums, this kind of unwillingness to compromise and saying either my way or the highway, because a lot of people are going to choose the highway or worse, right? Additionally, one of the things that we can get into when we have these energies all together is going to be fear mongering. And I don't just mean in the media, though that's totally going to be a thing, but feeling fear and being preached to about fear about things. So that's going to be a part of the collective energy here, is fearfulness and then pushing that onto others. And what I will say here is that it's probably a bit overboard here. Again, try not to make rash decisions out of fear, especially. Finally, when it comes to productivity, there's going to be a bit of like a grind in here where we feel like we need to just kind of grind through the situation and push. I would plan for some delays. Infrastructure, tech, all really likely to hit snags here and there. Try to plan extra time for travel. Try to stay away from erratic drivers and try to focus on breakthroughs. So it's a great time for being highly motivated toward persistence, toward endurance, especially if you have something that is a bit boring to have to be just muddled through. Maybe this is taxes. It is tax season in the US. If you need to like kind of push through that, maybe you've been procrastinating it a bit. This energy should help you to see that through, to just kind of keep pushing and to seek the satisfaction and the sense of accomplishment that comes from completing tasks. So on a personal level, there's an opportunity for breakthrough in focus or through personal willpower, but it is going to require effort. It's going to require persistence, determination. It's going to run up against some frustration, and we'll need to not give up in those moments. And if we can also not then allow for that frustration to be passed on to someone else or to come out through anger toward others. Additionally, maybe one of the best ways that we could utilize Mercury running through this area is try to let this moment teach us how to deal with obstacles. Because we're going to run into them here and there all throughout our days, all throughout April. But if we can pay attention to how do we get triggered? When do we get especially frustrated? What is our knee-jerk reaction to these things? We can learn a lot about ourselves and how we deal with frustrations through this period of time. Additionally, when it comes to this instant karma thing, part of what really kind of tapped me into that was that Mercury is in the mix here, and Mercury is incredibly susceptible to whatever it's dealing with, whatever it's touching, and what it is involved with right now is both the malefics. So that's part of the reason why this triple conjunction here, that's all going to be in the same degree. I'll show you that visual on the next slide. But part of what concerns me about that kind of an alignment is that Mercury can become a bit of a malefic energy when it is influenced in that way. However, Mercury, more than anything, is a trickster. And so if it is dealing with all sorts of crappy, weird energies, it could come through as this kind of weird wild card energy where, again, there's that immediate backlash to really bad actions that is weirdly maybe funny as well, you know? So hopefully we see some of that in the culture if people are being as rough as I'm thinking that they will be as we get into the global political, you know, kinds of situations that we'll talk about here in a moment. That trickiness of Mercury may give us some laughs in the midst of all of this as well. But it can also cut corners. It can also, you know, try to get out of doing certain things. I would say when we're dealing with Saturn, most especially, if we can try and play it by the book, if we can try and do things really as correctly and with as much integrity as possible, we're unlikely to run into real problems here. So now let's get to the more not so fun aspect of this, which is going to be leadership. So see here, this is the triple conjunction, all at 8 degrees that we have between Mercury and Mars and Saturn. This is taking place on the 20th of April. And this whole period of time, but again, especially kind of centered on that period of time, it's this kind of pressure cooker effect on the global situation that we're dealing with. I actually want to start off with a couple of things that I have been very attuned to this period of time and that I've noticed are going to be coming up that's interesting and relevant here. So it is on this day here that the enlistment standards are going to be in effect as changed in the States. So the age limits are relaxed, but also, amusingly enough, on 420, there's also then a relaxing of standards regarding previous marijuana specifically charges. Additionally, if things continue as they do, this is really the back end of the dates when the US and Israel are supposed to be running out of interceptors. I do think that there is going to be some disastrously bad judgment in a war situation. I'm hoping that we don't see any sort of steps toward a quote unquote nuclear option here. Though I do want to point out that's something that's been standing out to me and to a lot of astrologers over the past several years, as we have noted that Uranus is just about to move into Gemini permanently right on the other side of this. And Uranus in Gemini is associated with nuclear weapons. It was there when we developed them, and it was there when they were deployed, the only time that they were deployed. Another aspect of all of this, if we look at this current conflict, which, hey, maybe hopefully beyond, hoping beyond hope here, if we were to imagine the greatest possible, result from Mars and Saturn in Aries would be an end to war. However, we don't see that historically. And there's a few historical things that I want to point out here. One is that this current conflict in the broader context of the war that kicked off in October of 2023 and that spun into the conflict between Israel and Iran that the U.S. wound up getting involved in the 12-day war. This has all been developing out of eclipses that were taking place in Aries and Libra. So this is when that started. Now we're getting all of those points are going to get hit up by these planets, and it's likely that we're going to see this go further. Additionally, I want to point out the last times that we have seen Mars-Saturn conjunctions in Aries were 1968 and 1998. So 1968 was the point of the major worsening of the Vietnam War. 1998 was the Kosovo War. So even though, interestingly enough, with the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aries and with Saturn and Aries kind of generally speaking, we do sometimes see gun control. 1968 in the US, there was the initiation of gun control after the assassination attempts that took place a little bit earlier in that year. But we certainly don't see wars stopping in either of those years, unfortunately. Again, I am hoping beyond hope that somehow this comes through in a different kind of a way, but I don't think that it will. I think that things are going to become even more of a quagmire. And speaking of quagmire, that is also something that I've been preaching quite a bit because of the fact that Venus and Jupiter, when they get together in Cancer, unfortunately, they do tend to get the United States into quagmires of our own making. The US has a bunch of stuff, a bunch of planets in Cancer. And so basically, to me, that is speaking of getting pretty high on our own supply, expecting that, oh, we're just going to, go in and tell everyone what to do and so forth. And it winds up becoming a major quagmire because we go too far and it, gets really out of hand. So, for instance, we saw this in 2002, around then, when we were starting to work toward the quagmire that we wound up getting into in Iraq, which, of course, is now spinning up again. And that is also repeated throughout history as well, including Vietnam. So I wanted to kind of give a lot of that context and point out that these are overall issues that we've been a bit worried about coming up this year for a lot of different reasons. And this does look like a flashpoint in all of this. I hate to say that. I will give us some good news at the end, like I said, but that Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, stellium in Aries is big time fog of war problems. There's going to be some insanely bad judgment going on when it comes to war with those in Aries. Aries is the sign of war. Mars is the planet of war. Saturn is the planet of authority. Neptune is the planet of fogginess and things that go beyond where they should. Mercury is our judgment, our mind. So the decisions that are made are just going to be really bad. And the problem here is that there's just such a lack of clarity around which action to take. And there's probably not very many good options other than disengagement, like I said, for us all personally. However, that's very unlikely to have play out on the global level here. There's also a major lack of discipline or accountability other than blowback. So people aren't going to stop until they're made to stop by Saturn. And Saturn isn't going to stop trying to constrict and clamp down until Mars blows back against it, pushes back against it. And all of this is happening in a place that just is very, very foggy and where we're not sure about what's going on, where there's a bunch of misinformation, disinformation, and just a lack of understanding. It's just a recipe for major problems. Rashness, control, foolishness. There's this desire with this energy to kind of wipe the slate clean, but not in a great way, and in a way that's probably going to create more problems. I do hate to say 1968, 1998, this is likely to play out as mass harm events for regular people as well, outside of war zones even. Hopefully there are not children or young people that are involved in that in some way. But like I said, we may have certain events that look like they're going to play out in a certain way and then get totally twisted such that they're not able to go forward. I would really credit Mercury with that because it is a trickster in the mix here, and it will play an interesting both sides kind of a role here where Mercury itself will resist going all bad, and so it will show people the folly of their judgment if they are going all in on this energy. The stop and go warfare issue, there's likely to be logistical issues, operational issues. We could see, again, stoppage of weapons on kind of any scale, either interceptions or blocking supply routes for things like that, or not having enough of this or that. As I mentioned, the interceptors are planned to, if things stay as they are, it's likely that around this point, we're almost out of everything, all of the different types. We could see sanctions or blockades, but we could also see gun control or weapons control in some way. We did see the Non-Proliferation Act was in 68. I'm not holding out hope for something like that, but it's interesting. However, if there is a sudden big deployment of a bunch of weapons as well, that could run into infrastructural or logistical or operational issues as well. So there could be breakdowns and stop and go kind of in that way as well. I would just expect mishaps basically in martial environments. We're also likely to run into border and maritime disputes with Neptune in the mix here. So we've been seeing that in an interesting way. I've been preaching this for a couple years, that we were going to wind up seeing a lot of interceptions and blockages of ships shipping and trying to clamp down on certain waterways and things like that. And we have seen that in spades, even more than I was expecting, right out of the gate, as Saturn has been there with Neptune, Saturn being that kind of stoppage or blockage. It's likely to get more martialized or more conflictual, with that being in Aries. Of course, we have seen the waterway blocked because of the war in the Strait of Hormuz, but we could see that outside of there as well. So there are a lot of other narrow waterways that could get blocked, or see a lot of interceptions of ships or attacks on ships and things like that. Or blockages of shipping, maybe because there's the whole insurance issue that's coming up. Maybe this is a, sovereignty issue that is coming up. Beyond that, with Mercury in the mix and Saturn there too, we could see this in the form of legislation, which seems to kind of drop the hammer, or these authoritarian overreaches in the form of bills and laws, maybe speech crackdowns with Mercury in the mix. We're likely to see a lot of public blowback to that, though, because of the sovereignty issue here. People aren't going to like to see their liberties taken away when we have all of these alignments in early Aries, which is very independent. And what's interesting about this, too, is that the authority of Saturn itself is in a complicated situation here. So authority is likely to come under incredible pressure that could wind up breaking down, or it could wind up behaving in wild, extreme ways that needs to be restrained. If we see leaders faltering, if we see authority breaking down, we could see that overreach due to a sense of desperation, an attempt to concentrate and pull in as much power and control and force and so forth to oneself as possible. This does also impact markets when we have Mercury involved, especially exchange markets, maybe exchange rates. Again, any sort of transit as well, trade. So I would expect flashpoints along those lines as well. What are the rates? What are the values of things? We could see some major, skyrocketing and plummeting and so forth kind of across the board. So there's a lot of risk here. Especially with Mars and Mercury involved, that could have a lot to do with where is power, where's energy. Not to mention, we also still have some sextiles playing out to Pluto, which also has to do with power supplies, oil, gas, coal, any sort of solar, any sort of electricity, grids, things like that as well. We may even see some exchange market issues where there's a breakdown there. I heard something, I'm not a finance whiz, but when this all started, there were some triggers that got hit, I think in the Republic of Korea, their markets, where the markets themselves shut down based on the rules of, if things plummet to this extent, then we just shut down the market because we don't want to have a panic kind of take over something. So we may see some of those things triggered again. I'm not a financial advisor. Let me just throw that out there. But yeah, Mercury has a lot to do with trade and commerce and things like that. So I would expect some breakdown there, but also in terms of infrastructure with Saturn in the mix as well, especially infrastructure to get things places. So there's a big logistical aspect to Mercury and Saturn when they get together. Engineering issues, infrastructure breakdowns, metal, machinery, all the military stuff too. Those systems could wind up becoming overstrained to the point of failure. So we could see something just kind of grinding to a halt there. Hopefully not traffic due to some sort of an infrastructure issue. We could also see explosions or fire involving machinery or metal industry, etc. We saw that at the Valero situation. That seems to be natural that happened, or without intervention, who knows? But the sun during that time was right in between Saturn and Neptune. And Saturn and Neptune together is that like pipe and underneath the ground and transferring things from one place to another kind of infrastructure. Hopefully not, but we could totally also see some real extreme storms or weather, natural disasters, things like this. The ground could be shaken. This could be like seismic issues, but it could also be some really extreme storms, maybe due to a lot of hot air. Hopefully not fire issues, though that could also make sense. Transit issues and breakdowns along those lines, or communications or technology breakdowns, or needing to shut things down along those lines as well. Hopefully not communication systems, but that could also be the case. But yeah, in the strongest sense, I would expect some, like we're kind of seeing, but maybe rising up even higher supply chain issues because of either the friction, the geopolitical friction, or physical accidents. Finally, with Mercury involved, this is also definitely going to have a lot to do with media, with propaganda, with messaging, with matters of truth and lies, with matters of mental clarity, delusion, censorship, speech crackdowns, etc. So this can wind up encouraging incredibly strong statements, especially statements that seem to demand a stop to something or demanding that something has to change. Now, that can be for good or bad. It could come in the form of ultimatums or threats of a pretty extreme nature, but I would really expect a lot of very extreme rhetoric. Again, fear-mongering, saber-rattling, trying to control people's perception of things and make that more fearful, make that more hateful. So we could run into and see a lot more hateful language, out-and-out lies, manipulations, a lot of angry speech and communications, a lot of angry actions as well, and angry minds acting out. Even marking speech, like part of the censorship where the speech crackdown could be claiming that speech itself is dangerous or violent or something like this. But yeah, I would really expect the propaganda machine to just be totally crazy and peaking out right now. Really rigid ideologies getting pushed. On a spiritual level, this is also going to be that kind of fire and brimstone, wrath kind of energy that's coming through religious figures as well. Those stories are likely to be very fire and brimstone, pushing narratives under the guise of a spiritual guidance. We could see a lot of polarization as well along those lines. Now, additionally, issues of surveillance and stuff like that. One thing that was interesting to me is that when I was looking at the Sabian symbol for this degree, it is speaking to a seer, or it is sometimes a crystal gazer. And so that does speak to being able to see things in their completeness, being able to see things that have happened, see things that are about to happen. There's this kind of clairvoyance to this degree. But if we think about the gazer and we think about Mercury being there with Mars and Saturn, if we want to lean into Tolkien lore, there's a crystal gazer in that story, and that is not so great. And that crystal is referred to as Palantir. So I don't know. There's something here about surveillance, I think, as well, that's probably going to be a bit of an issue. It may not center specifically around Palantir, although, that is a little bit on the nose for this degree. But I would really expect a lot of spying, a lot of major revelations or issues of AI spying, breaking apart like networks and systems, hacking, taking data, intelligence gathering on a really, really, really high level, and maybe much more broadly than is legal. That said, this is an interesting, maybe better way of going about things than using force, is using observation throughout this time, especially when we get to this really close triple conjunction where they're all at 8 degrees. Let people show their true colors. Just pay attention and then act on it later. Now, I promised a little bit of good news. One thing, of course, we're looking at 68, which we are big time this year. We have a lot of similar alignments to 1968, which I've been pointing out here and there. One of them is also that not only is Saturn in Aries this year, which it was in 68, but Jupiter will also be moving into Leo, and it'll be trining that Saturn, which we saw in 68. I expect with this first decan of Aries, that has to do with the youth. And so young people will be prominent in this. And there may be an anti-war movement that winds up getting stirred up. That is something that I've been expecting to start to get kicked up, and it hasn't quite yet. So I'm thinking that this might be a decent moment for that. Saturn in Aries does speak to kind of anti-war efforts. It's not just reinforcing and utilizing authority in war, but it is also, as it's a malefic, these tend to negate whatever it's touching. Saturn is particularly prickly about Aries. It doesn't like to be in this sign. It is in its fall when it's in Aries. So it is in a very unfamiliar, rushed environment, whereas Saturn likes to deal with long periods of time. Saturn likes to be very responsible. Aries doesn't really do that. Mars, on the other hand, is in its own sign when it's in Aries. So these two are very worked up about where they're at. And that's part of also why they are bumping up against each other, especially hard in this sign. And so I do expect actions of young people, but also actions against young people will be a central theme that winds up arising here. There may be major protests against the extreme rhetoric or authoritarian legislation or wars, conflicts, violence, things like that. Uprisings, rejection of authority here. Very strong statements from young people as well is what I would really expect. So with all of that said, let me talk a little bit about the geopolitical alignments. When it comes to actual natal charts of nations, this alignment in particular, it is opposite to the sun of China. It is conjunct the midheaven of Germany and opposite its sun as well. It is conjunct the sun of Iran. It is conjunct the Mars of Russia. It is opposite the Uranus of Musk. So there could be a complication for him in the midst of all of this. It is on the moon of Jeffrey Epstein. It is on the north node of the Andrew formerly known as Prince. It is in and amidst a NATO Aries stellium. It is opposite to the Libra stelliums of Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin. Gustavo Petro, the leader of Colombia, also has an Aries stellium, and he also has his solar return coming up on April 19th. So this in particular will be in his solar return, and that's a bit bumpy. Finally, Volodymyr Zelensky's south node is also in this area. Now, when we plot these alignments out on the global map, I've done this for Mars-Saturn, for Mercury-Mars, and for Mercury-Saturn, and there are some overlapping themes there. We see a major alignment here of these planets angular, which means rising, setting directly overhead or directly underneath the ground in West through Central Europe. So we can see not only NATO, but potentially EU considerations coming up. That is also West Central Africa. And by central, I mean east to west. It's all the way down through north, south. There's a lot of angularity over China, India, the Pacific, and in particular New Zealand, North America through northern South America. And by northern South America, I actually do mean it is angular over Colombia quite a bit. So again, Gustavo Petro, Colombia, as well as Cuba. So as I mentioned, and as I pointed out in these visuals, we do have that new moon also coming up here. This is just going to set in stone a bit more some of this energy. This is our Aries new moon for the year. And so a lot of this energy, even as it spreads out, is likely to have a strong impact in terms of things that were initiated around this period of time playing out over a longer period of time. But we will discuss that more in a future video as well. So with all of that said, I do want to thank you all so much for being here. I hope that this video was helpful, useful. I know it wasn't the cheeriest of our videos. I do have a little bit of good news that we do have some decent alignments coming up in like May and June. So we'll be discussing those somewhat soon. We also have Uranus, like I said, right after the height of this. That is moving into Gemini. And not only Does that, yes, have a little bit to do with nuclear stuff that we don't really want to think about right now, but it is also very hope inspiring. We tend to correct a lot of the ills of recently previous years as we get Uranus moving into Gemini. So we will be discussing that in the next video. I'm personally really excited about that. I think that that is going to help us so much to get beyond a lot of the BS that we've been dealing with in the past like 7-8 years. So there is good news around the corner, but hopefully this can help you to avoid some of the pitfalls of all of the Aries energy that we're going to be dealing with here. So yeah, if it was helpful to you, if you enjoyed it, and you don't mind giving a like or hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. And do consider sticking around by subscribing for future videos. I tend to go through these different significant alignments, look at them on a collective energetic level, on a global level, and then take them through sign by sign. There is also information in the description box below and in the pinned comment about personal bookings for natal, year ahead, locational, synastry, compatibility, astrology readings. There's also information on the latest course offerings, as well as membership perks, which include weekly forecasts where we go through all of the alignments that are going to take place in any given week, and we tend to review a lot of what we have predicted and seeing how that wound up playing out each week. Memberships also receive all of the courses for free, discounts, free reading, drawings, etc. So all of that information is in the description box below, as well as the pinned comment. And I do want to thank the members of this channel so much for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Aya, Rachel Windholtz, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dolly Geezy, Mango JT, B Love, Startlingly True, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Maria Cyril Hyro, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W., Jonathan Mason, Adrian K., SP, Ezekiel LaRosa, Teresa Jones, Sherry Leas, Nioke Beam, Farts and Chuckles, Create, Gales Tarot and Astrology, Talita McKenzie, K from NH, Pitar Music, Nancy Imhoff, Peta Carlin, Sarah M. Cap, Angela Lazaire, Horse Hearse, Jane Bevan, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P., Indy Loon, Linda Skull, Mahernu Shamiri, Ellen McCormick Martins, Black Sheep Pink Unicorn, Someone 77, Purple Table Tarot, Hookerzilla, Joshua Owen, J.A., Carrie Affronti, Mike, Lynn Ching, Kiska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gull, Many Stars, E.F., Zoe, Plamena Molinova, Dante Hill, The Muslim Researcher, Larissa F., Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Janet McCann, Gamine, CPT Alpha 12, Mina Dobras, NG, Rebecca Cortez, Ricky Dandridge, Novocaine, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Mason HKW, Adya Freya Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, M.A., Nat Catnip, Shane V., Jesse, Aaron Paterson, Shell Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, This Is It, My Friend, Tracy Gordine, Sabrina Simon, JL, Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul Revolution, Esther Swan, Victoria Gordon, Lizzie Willow, Scarlett Sparks, Patricia Cogley, Alex T., Kim Spina, Rachel Y., Ruby Payne, Valerie Hamilton, Gabrielle Pages, Sunshine, Ampotate, Rebecca Fusetti, Anna Jordan, Roxette De La Cruz, I Hate 1988, Sylvia C., Jennifer Arena, Veronica Dubiel, Linda McCallum, Jenny Tron, B., Desiree Dembski Hamlin, Maria Paula Major, Katie Scarlett, Sandra Anderson, Corvix Cornix, The Electric Cheese Productions, Marlena Kimber, Giselle Christine, Danny Baneyful, Stacy Starkey, Aw Cameron, Casey Rusma, Petra S., Kelly Zarsa, Peace Yarn and Paper, Mused Wellness, Padme Moonflower, Holobiont, One of Many, Monique Bird, Pample Granite, Deb Wrights, Melissa Campbell, Susanna, Jenna Martindale, Charles Oganike, Siobhan, Big Sky 25, I Am Just Me, RG, Maria Brandusa, Coleman, Moon and Mind with Val, Candace Harris, Angela C., Amanda, Rusina Velov, Belen Valadares, Elma Reinhold, Karen Charis, Amy Odom, Jenna Chatton, Sophia M., Still Ripples Coaching, Claudiuda, Catherine Terra, Lisa Cummings, Dortya Cogman, Melissa Sinclair, Fanau Tutone, Jessie Gret, Sharif Artzik, Linda Yavin, Emra Ogman, Mel, Daryl Fang, That Witch Danny, Psychic Tarot, Kate Vaughn, Bucky, Eye of Modoc, Jess Morris, Femke Lemberg, The Crappy Cancer, Bubba444, Tea with Lilith, G, J, From Scarcity to Sovereignty, Iris Ho, Ronick M. West, Nika Ritter, L. Rude, Mardulia, Rich Casey, Via Matves, Nikita Sharma, Tracy Lammer, Basina Adekanbi, David Stanica, Luciana Capasani, Being Real with John, and Claudia Sipes. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have the Aries Stellium in your first house. So this is going to be pretty personal for you. It's going to be a lot about your identity, how you project yourself, how you interact with other people. So there's going to be a whole lot of energy here. Now, it may be a bit of like push and pull. It may feel like that energy is kind of stop and go, like you feel a big rush of motivation to get something done, and then you may feel like you get kind of tuckered out more easily, or you get more obstacles here and there. Maybe it feels like you're not quite on the same page as other people. One thing that I would kind of watch out for a little bit over the course of this time is that, to me, when there's a transit going through the first house, it can definitely be how we are kind of projecting ourselves, but it can also be how people are approaching us. And since you do have both Mars and Saturn there, you may find that this is a period of time where interacting with other people is somewhat less enjoyable because it feels like everyone's just kind of on one, or they feel like they are somewhat aggressive or domineering or demanding, basically. So you may find that you're just kind of bumping up against others throughout this period of time. And it's not necessarily the new normal, but it will probably continue that way to some extent or another until about May, maybe even into May. So with the new moon in the mix here, there is going to be a real desire to initiate things, but this is a strange new moon. So it is occurring with, Mercury and Mars and Saturn and Neptune all there in Aries with it, and that Mars is ruling this new moon. So you may want to slow roll, or maybe just not go from 0 to 100 on a brand new plan. And I hate to say that because I'm the type of person that loves to jump on enthusiasm and energy when I have it. But I would say that if you initiate something right around this time and you don't give it a lot of thought, it's likely that there's going to be significantly more complications, obstacles, things that you didn't think about, issues coming up than you kind of bargained for when you set out to do something. So I would just let things develop as slowly, as surely, as soundly, basically as possible throughout the coming, I would say 7-8 weeks, like into May. And we'll look at this in a couple of weeks more from that new moon standpoint. But overall, throughout this period of time, you'll definitely be feeling a push to be assertive. But again, there's likely to be delays, pushback, fatigue that sets in sooner than you're expecting for it to. You may even have some mental fog with Mercury going through and conjoining right in a row Neptune, Mars, Saturn. Again, I wouldn't fret about that too terribly much until you get right to the end of April, when Mercury finally moves past that whole group of planets. You may then find that, okay, no, I am sharpening up here. Things are more clear. So give that some time. I would say the biggest thing here, because I'm preaching so much patience with this, having this in your first house, I think the most important thing for you is going to be as patient with yourself as you can and your ideas. They may not be as fully formed as you're feeling like they are initially, but if you give them time, then they will be quite sharp and clear by the end of this. Another thing to watch out for with Mercury coming through this area, and the fact that you are likely to be projecting a stronger kind of an energy that may hit some people a little weird. So basically, you may be triggering people way more easily than you would think that you would be, maybe even for mysterious reasons with Neptune in the mix. So try to work that into the equation, that you're going to be coming off stronger than you're expecting to. So try to speak gently, try not to be domineering or overreaching yourself onto other people. Try to kind of demarcate your own lane and maybe stay in it a bit. Now, if you do need to make a really strong impression on someone, if you do need to make a really strong statement, this is going to help to that end. But I think the best way to use this energy is toward personal goals and working through that motivation and clarifying all of the steps that you're going to need to take and how it is that you're going to be able to actually sustainably apply energy to the ends of accomplishing personal goals. But yeah, like I said, we're going to come back to this in a couple of weeks when we look at this just from the new moon standpoint. And until then, I do hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 12th house. And this is the place of your subconscious, things that are somewhat outside of your awareness or outside of your direct view, things that go on under the surface, aspects of spirituality and spiritual energies. So this is going to be bringing a huge amount of energy to that area. So you should feel like you are more in touch with, or almost being forced to be more in touch with, your subconscious or any sort of psychological patterns, any hidden issues that are under the surface for you that have been difficult maybe to like wrap your arms around or to see or to address or to deal with. Also any sort of habits, self-sabotaging tendencies, things like that. This should be bringing that up to a bit of a fever pitch. Now, it does give you, though, the ability to then see that and address it and enable you to close some chapters or let some of that go, to release some of that. I would say if this is coming up for you, to try to be as patient as you can with yourself throughout this period of time. This is meant to be coming up right now, and not to like self-flagellate over any sort of pitfalls or habits or issues like that, but rather to just see what those are so that you're able to address them. You may even find, because there's a bit of a closure aspect to the 12th house as well, you may find that there are some kind of karmic debts just in the ether that you've been working through, where this should enable you to see how those are affecting you as well. And therefore, again, be able to close some chapters along those lines and say, for instance, maybe this is an old connection or something that is long gone, but just kind of sticks with you or lingers, in your energy. Maybe there's some doubt about being able to move forward in a specific way because, oh, well, that didn't help or that didn't work in the past because of XYZ. Maybe you're kind of caged in a bit by an old situation, and this would kind of bring those feelings up to the fore, maybe on an emotional level, I have to say, or maybe on a frustration level or something along those lines of being a little bit like pissed off for greatness, I think is how Chris Reck refers to it, of feeling like I need to deal with this now and I can't be held in by this anymore. So that is really helpful, but it might not be the most comfortable of things. But again, super beneficial. You may also find that your dreams, or if you meditate or you go like into your subconscious intentionally or unintentionally, even daydreams, things like this, like there's a lot that's going on there. So you could be working through a lot of different messages or stressors, psychological situations, or channeling through your subconscious mind or your mind when it is more at rest. So I will say, like, if you tend to wake up and you're a little bit uncomfortable or a little stressed, you may be working some things out in your sleep state, but you may also, again, have these really strong visions that come through. One thing I would caution a bit about that is if it seems incredibly fearful or like it's preaching an overly rough image, right? Then you may want to question that a little bit. I will say Mars and Saturn in your 12th house, especially with Neptune there being really able to like spin out a story and affirm any sort of negative ideas that Mars and Saturn can come up with. This will probably work on fear a bit, or negative outlooks, things like that. So like I said, that may come up to a bit of a fever pitch, but I wouldn't stay in that space, and I wouldn't so much believe those energies, because that would be the way that this would wind up misleading you, is by saying that something's more fearful than it should be. But this could also be just very initiating. So getting a really clear view of something that you want to create or you want to go after, that I would believe a bit more. That's the kind of higher principle of Mars and Saturn when they get together. You may also just find that you're either working way better behind the scenes, so like a lot of productivity behind the scenes, or that you just feel like you really want to get away from people quite a bit, or that you're really even enjoying or feeling like you have more energy when you are just kind of doing your own thing throughout this period of time, which is going to be like pretty much all of April, and then into the first week or two-ish of May as well. You may find that you have a lot of motivation to just be by yourself and process your own thoughts, process your own experiences, look over things, make plans. You're very much in planning stages right now. So I wouldn't be shy to retreat, recharge on your own, find some sense of solitude and work things out in that space. And yeah, finally, this try to bring quiet to your mind and potential racing thoughts. That's the more rough aspect of these energies, is that it could bring up those fears or anxious thoughts or things like that, where you're trying to sort something out, you're trying to solve for something, but maybe it's not even a real problem. Sometimes we can create problems in our own minds, and then we can try to fix them, and it's completely futile because the problem isn't real anyway, you know? So when it comes to, again, those negative thoughts that don't seem to be solving anything, I would say try, if you can, to just not go all in on those and try to move forward without those and see how that winds up going, because there is going to be a lot of just unnecessary noise there. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. I am going to look at this more from the perspective of the new moon in a couple of weeks here and bring us back to this energy, remind that this is going on once we get into April. So feel free to stick around for that as well. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 11th house. And this is the place of your hopes, dreams, aspirations, as well as groups of people that you identify with, that you interact with, typically people who are beneficial to you and to increasing your station in life. So this is likely to have you looking at those connections that you have, the groups that you belong to, and questioning whether or not they're actually satisfying, especially if there are any that feel somewhat conflictual, that feel dramatic, that feel like people are not really seeing eye to eye, feel like certain people are pushing forward, some people are pushing back. This could have you deciding that you full on want to disconnect from groups like that, with both Mars and Saturn here. Now, this is also going to be driving up a lot of motivation around creating more ideal situations for you in terms of the people that you're connected to and whether or not you are working towards similar goals. So it would be wonderful to try and lay out some plans along those lines. What do you really want to have in terms of the people that you're connected to? This could have a lot to do with being in a leadership position or having a lot of influence over people as well. That may be something that you are stepping into in order to bring a sense of order to a group that you belong to. People may be coming to you for answers about things, and you may even have a lot, maybe even an overwhelming amount of people coming in and seeking either your support or your guidance, your wisdom, your understanding of certain things, your involvement in certain projects, things like this. And the reason that I say it could be overwhelming is, again, we do have Mars and Saturn here. So you may feel like you have a whole hell of a lot of work to get through. And then there's a lot that seems to be coming in as well. So I would definitely recommend pacing yourself. And this is going to be especially strong, I would say, through pretty much all of April, especially as we get into mid-April, but it's going to continue into May by about a week or two. So see if you can pace yourself along the lines of any sort of group projects, things like this, even solo projects that you're doing. This is going to give you a lot of drive to be a leader within your community or within projects. Again, if you belong to any, that's going to be a natural thing that people are picking up on. They're going to kind of put you into those positions, and you should feel somewhat comfortable pushing forward on that as long as there is a clear vision. And if there's not, that's where I think we could definitely get some drama getting into the mix within groups that you belong to. People around you may also be vying for leadership or influence or being able to take the reins, etc. And you may be in a position where you're needing to sort that out or address that or be like the adult in the room, basically. So when this comes to your hopes, dreams, aspirations, even outside of like group settings or dynamics like that, this is going to be highly, highly motivating to that end. But with that said, planning stages, excellent. Thinking things through, that's pretty cool. But if you do start going really all in and you start really pushing, you may find that there are more obstacles than you're used to dealing with. It may feel like there are these little things that keep coming up that you're needing to, kind of push through and so forth. The motivation probably won't falter, but you may get a little bit frustrated about that. So if you really feel like you're pushing up against it, then maybe give this some time to play out. Be patient with how things are actually unfolding. And if you don't have something that is already in the works that you're pushing forward on, this would be a wonderful energy to sort out like, okay, what is the ideal situation for me? What do I really want? As Mercury is passing Neptune, for instance, and Mars passing Neptune, working up some strong, motivation toward those ends. And then Mercury will wind up passing Saturn and then Mars in pretty quick order. And so this should help you to be able to figure out, okay, what are the resources that I have to this end? What would be a sound way to go about this? And then how am I going to start pushing on that level? Now, there may be some fog. There may be some confusion in the mix. I would not be surprised to see that. That's why I'm saying, like, try to be patient, try to let things play out in their own time, grounding your efforts toward those plans, trying to actually lay that out. You may want to write things down, figure this out on an agenda, and try to do so in a sustainable fashion. If you feel like you are able to accomplish so much more today than usual, don't necessarily expect to be able to do that tomorrow and the next day and the next day, for instance. Also, look for where are you running into nothing but obstacles. That might be a bit of a red flag here. Saturn to me doesn't usually say just no when we start to run into situations that require a lot of endurance, but it will really start to throw up a lot of obstacles if it does want for us to change course. So I would just try and stay pretty tuned into what's working, what's not working. Can we pivot around and do things a little bit differently when we do run into a lot of complications? And then finally, again, just coming back to let things play out in their own timing here. The impetus is going to be there, and you're going to really want to act on things quickly, but it's going to be better if we can be really sound in this moment rather than that we are finishing something super quickly in this moment. But yeah, I'm going to come back around to this again in a couple of weeks. We'll look at this specifically from that new moon perspective, and I'm going to remind us all about this in a couple of weeks here. So stick around if you want to check that out. And until then, I do hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have this Aries Stellium taking place in your 10th house. This is the place of your reputation. If you have a traditional career, this is where that's going to wind up showing up. Authority figures, your own sense of authority, your path forward, your future, your ambitions, what you're pushing for, what you're pushing to create, and where you're trying to make a mark in your life. So this is going to give you a lot of energy and impetus toward those ends. So you're likely to feel a really strong drive to kind of take this area of your life into your own hands and push forward. So your ambition levels are going to be somewhat unfamiliar in this space. As I mentioned in the collective reading, we haven't had Mars and Saturn together in Aries since like 1998. So this is an unfamiliar energy to be dealing with. And you may feel like, even if you're not the most ambitious person, like there's something that's coming in that has you really worked up about wanting to go after it and wanting to make your mark in that. So you could have a new professional chapter showing up, especially around the 17th. We're going to go full in on that new moon in a couple weeks here. We're going to look at it very much from that perspective. But this is going to be a broader like feeling throughout April into May of a lot of motivation to create a sort of pivot that you feel is going to push you to the next level here. And you'll probably feel very energized or very motivated to that end. But I will say that with Saturn in the mix here and with a little bit of confusion in the mix as well, you may find that there are these little annoying obstacles or complications that seem to creep in here and there that may seem to slow down your sense of stamina. So this is really about endurance. It's not about going all in. It's not about 0 to 100. It's about let's try and figure out what's really ideal for you in this place. And then let's at least get into the planning stages, try and plot that out and be really sustainable with how you're applying your energy and how you're going about these things. It's not about like, oh, I want this career, this position, and so I've decided that I'm going to have it next week. Maybe that may be the case, but I would more so expect that you're starting to work toward that end. And that there is now, in a very wonderful way, a new ambition that is clarified to you through this process. Now, because we have Saturn and Mars together here in Aries, up in your 10th, if you have a boss or an authority figure, if you're dealing with the government, anything like that, you may find that that is more annoying or a bit more demanding than usual. So hopefully people aren't being rude if they are in those kinds of positions or demanding a superhuman level of productivity, but you may feel like that is the case. There may be some drama or complications that are going on within your workplace, perhaps especially among, or at the very least with, some like boss figures. There may even seem to be a pretty serious complication within, if you work for a company, within the company itself, like within its structure that needs to be reworked. And I would try not to be too overly fearful about that. You may find that you're thinking about that a lot. If you are, just try and be patient with it. Try and give yourself some permission to step out of just thinking about that all the time. You may even find that your reputation for leadership is really heightened throughout this period of time. So I would try to use that. If I were to like focus hard on accomplishing anything during this time, it would be if people are treating you like or approaching you as a leader, expressing authority, expressing leadership with a lot of integrity is going to be incredibly important throughout this period of time because it's going to be super visible. So I would be treating any sort of position of authority that you are in or that you are being primed for, or that people are at least treating you like you are in because maybe you have more experience. Treat that as very like sacred almost, and try to approach that as well as possible. And you should wind up being able to get some real long-term benefit out of how you are treating maybe subordinates. If you don't, and if you are really, really, really focused on your own goals and stuff, and people are coming to you for help, for instance, you may feel like you are misunderstood by others. If you're really pushing, if you're super ambitious, that's what's going to come through. And sometimes that in and of itself can stir up drama. You may even have a boss or something that feels like you're gunning for their job if you are being very overtly ambitious. So yes, do that. Try to do it with integrity. Try to do it in a way that doesn't trigger too many people. And you should get the best benefit out of this alignment here. This is really about keeping your eye toward long-term goals. So any sort of positions or projects that you're working on, try to keep your eye on those long-term goals and not just short-term wins and things like that. And not trying to like sweep aside some aspects of work or over-delegate or things like that. Finally, if there is a lot of people coming to you and you feel very like overstretched when it comes to what you're able to do, being really honest about that and laying out those boundaries as you are able to. If there is a boss figure that is really just going over the top and it's not okay, you may need to speak that. But I would not wait to such an extent that it's bottled up and winds up coming out in an outburst that makes you maybe look like you're being too aggressive about a situation. So some things to kind of keep in mind before you address someone in a strong way that way. Give yourself a moment, make sure you're emotionally regulated, have a game plan, and then do so in a very calm state of mind if you are remotely able. This kind of energy is going to pull you straight in the other direction. It's going to get that like hot feeling, kind of overcoming you, and then it's going to want to come out in that moment. If that happens, that can create some level of blowback. So that's what I would really try to avoid. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer, for now. As I mentioned, we're going to look at this from the perspective primarily of that new moon here in 2 weeks. So if that is something you want to stick around for, that'll be coming out shortly, just to remind everyone of what April's looking like. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 9th house. This is a place of the expansion of your horizons, of broadening your life experience. So higher education shows up here, travel, dealings with foreign people, philosophy, belief systems, worldview, things like this. Also publishing shows up in this house. So this is going to have a lot of energy bringing up those matters and a lot of desire to pursue this area of your life. So you may find that you are highly motivated to learn. You may find a course, you may run across a course, or you may even seek one out that is along the lines of something that you've been wanting to learn for some time and are finally kind of getting a fire lit under you to really pursue that. You may also feel a real wanderlust, like a desire for adventure. Maybe you're going to want to go on a road trip or take a flight somewhere or just go and explore unfamiliar territories. This could even be like close to home, but just places you haven't been, people you haven't dealt with. This is going to be highly motivated to, again, like expand your horizons, broaden your sense of life experience by putting yourself into those unfamiliar settings, right? So you may also find that you are digging really, really, really heavily into some either ideology or philosophy, worldview. This could be astrology, divination, anything along those lines, religion, humanities, really of any sort. So studying society or studying culture, anything along those lines, you could really feel like a huge, huge, huge motivation to that end. There will be with Saturn here quite a bit of work to do on that front. So if you, for instance, are already a student, this could have you running into different obstacles here and there where you're needing to apply extra effort to really deeply learn or feel satisfied with your understanding of some given topic that you're trying to learn. The 9th house can also have a bit to do with legal matters. And so if you find yourself in a legal situation, I would say probably better to slow roll that. You may have like someone on your side who is a real firebrand and is going to be able to get things done quite a bit, but I wouldn't necessarily be pushing too hard if you are not fully in integrity or you don't really kind of know what you're doing is what I'm kind of trying to avoid saying. But with Pluto also in the 7th house, that could wind up reinforcing that. So if you are already in the midst of a legal situation, this could be a moment where there is a breakthrough, but I would also really preach, try to be in as much integrity as you can be throughout pretty much all of April, and then definitely well into May. So at least the first couple of weeks of May as well. Now, you may even just be that wanderlust. It could be on a more kind of spiritual level of wanting to have a little bit more magic in your life and wanting to infuse your life with this more kind of like mystical sense of life as a quest or life as a sacred experience. And so you may be trying to infuse that more into your life as well and be led more by your heart in that way. You may even find that there's a renewal where you're kind of coming back to a belief system and looking at it from a different perspective. You could also find that there's a lot of energy that's coming from opportunities along the lines of travel or education or involving foreign lands or foreign people or international, like even like multinational companies could be, in the midst here. And just international opportunities, generally speaking, or publishing. If you were a writer, for instance, this could be a publisher that's kind of on your back about, getting something done. If you self-publish, you may be on your own back. So I would recommend there's likely to be a lot of opportunity here, but there's going to be these moments where you're really excited and you're all in. But then these other moments, because we have Mars and Saturn together and they're kind of bumping up against each other, these other moments where you feel a bit maybe drained, tired, a bit worn out, a bit like, okay, these demands are just unrealistic. So it's going to be a bit of like push and pull. See if you can maybe plan ahead for that by trying not to overschedule yourself at any given time. And try to be cautious about what it is that you are taking on your plate throughout this time with this as well. Now, also, this is a place of, again, your worldview, your ideology, your belief system about things, and you may feel very strongly compelled to either push for those beliefs. So public speaking also tends to show up in the ninth house in some ways, or you may feel the need to kind of stick your neck out for people that you believe that they should be treated some way or another. You may run into some drama or some conflict, some pushback over this with other people as well. And I would take that as an opportunity to kind of sharpen that skill set of checking your beliefs and then asserting them in a way that is as effective as possible. And definitely be seeking truth, because I think that that's going to be ultimately the most satisfying aspect of all of this, is whether it be connecting with people on a more broad level, whether it be seeking out some broader aspect of your life almost aspirationally or ambitiously, whether it be like really desiring to broaden your horizons or your life experience, studying humanities, studying philosophy, etc. It's all coming back to wanting to have a greater sense or a more holistic sense of truth in your own life. But yeah, we will also get this new moon here. I'm going to speak a bit more directly to that in a video in about 2 weeks. We'll discuss the Uranus moving into Gemini, and then we're going to come back to this. And I'm going to remind everyone that we're dealing with this energy for all of April. So stick around if that is something that you are interested in digging into more. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 8th house. This is a place of other people's resources, generally speaking. So that can be financial, it can be their energies, it can be kind of what's going on with them and how they intertwine and intermingle with your own life. This can have a lot to do with sharing and how your resources and others mix together. It's also a place of a lot of psychological depth and secrets outside of yourself, matters of boundaries, power dynamics, things like this. So it's a pretty in-depth place, and there's going to be a lot of energies going on like throughout this area. So this is going to bring a lot of focus on trying to sort out matters of resources, matters of sharing, matters of investments, maybe taxes. Of course, this is tax season, so I wouldn't be surprised if you're kind of focused on that quite a bit. Any debts, really feeling the urge to be done with those. So you may even find that you are front loading some payments on debt so that you can just get it done with, right? But it's going to be, I wrote resources twice here. It's going to be bringing up what resources you have and how much of those are going to the outside and how much of those resources from the outside are coming in. So that balance, that what are you getting out of what you're putting into things, right? So additionally, a lot of contracts, commitments, things like that also show up in this place. It's going to be excellent if, I would say foremost, like most preferable here would be to not sign a contract pretty much from, I will give you pretty specific dates here. I would say from the beginning of April through, I want to say it's about the 18th of May. Because we wouldn't really like to see both Mars and Saturn in your 8th if you're signing a contract. If you have to, just definitely make sure that you are very much reading the fine print, that you are quite clear about what you are agreeing to, because this energy altogether, it's so close together. Like, this doesn't really do justice to how like one on top of the other these planets are. And to have Mercury in the mix, that is an agreement, but it's also communications or clarity around any sort of an agreement. And it is definitely in a very afflicted kind of an energy here. It's in the midst of Neptune creating a lot of fog, and then Mars being super assertive, and Saturn setting a lot of limits and being kind of constrictive. And so one of the ways that we'll see this playing out, like in the world, for instance, as I mentioned in the collective readings, is lies. And I would just hate to see there be any sort of lies or deception or a major lack of clarity about a contract that you're getting involved in. Because when we're dealing with both of the malefics, sometimes there's not so much of a silver lining to a complication, you know? So even though Saturn's going to be there for a while, that's one thing. That's quite all right. That's fine. That could just mean, okay, you're getting into a commitment and it may take a little bit longer than you would expect for yourself to basically reach the end of such a contract or whatever. But when you're getting a very kind of tricky, demanding-ish kind of energy in the midst of that too, I would just, if you can, put it off. If you can't, don't skim over stuff. Make sure that you know what you're agreeing to. Additionally, this can be quite triggering on either side of an equation that involves you. So you may be triggering other people quite a bit. They may be triggered as all get out and like coming to you and kind of being a little bit, maybe, hopefully not like Debbie Downer too much. Hopefully not like almost like weirdly putting upon you their responsibilities, like saying that they're going to do something irrational and needing for you to talk them down or something like this. That's not really okay. But you may run into energies like that where it's overly complicated on the other side, and you may feel very put upon by those types of people. If you have those people in your life, I'm sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there may be someone who's kind of misrepresenting a like sad puppy kind of a situation. So I would also be a bit cautious about oversharing or opening yourself up too much to a bit of a sob story, because there's way more to that than is probably going to be readily presented to you. So I also wouldn't necessarily feel super guilty if you do maybe tighten up your purse strings a little bit or avoid certain characters that you know are along those lines. There may even be some secrets that you wind up uncovering that are somewhat uncomfortable, even from the past, about some energies like that. So, like I said, if you know people like that, if you're able to avoid them throughout this period of time, that's probably just going to be the better way to go about it. And setting firm boundaries here in your relationships, that's a big part of the reason why, although even with like healthy relationships, people may just be kind of putting upon you a little bit more, where there's just extra demands. People are kind of going through it, and they may be legitimately doing so, but you may feel quite drained. This is a place of your chart where sometimes the energy just seems to go outward and outward. And so I would be worried about like a lot of energy going out and then not being able to feel like you have enough for yourself, right? So whether that be finances, whether that be your time, your energy, your effort, your mood, your sense of well-being, your sense of like good mood, you know? So yeah, people may just be kind of downers, and you may even find that you want to withdraw a bit. I can only recommend that in situations where you do feel quite drained by people. And you may need to speak up about that. You may need to set some pretty strong boundaries about, hey, you know, I've got my whole own life of stuff going on and I try and stay pretty positive, but I can't deal with all my stuff and all your stuff, right? So also when it comes to power dynamics, that's probably going to play into this somewhat. And it may not be just that someone else is utilizing a sense of power over you, but you may need to exercise some power over situations that you're intertwined with other people in. So how do you handle power, especially over what's very much yours, your resources, your life, your mood, your energy, Where are you willing to put that? Where do you need to cut that off from? Also, if you do have power over other people, I would really try to utilize that in a very integrity-minded way throughout this period of time too, because there could be a bit of blowback if, for instance, you are kind of putting upon other people or you're being a little unfair with other people as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. I am going to look at this in a couple of weeks from the perspective of this new moon that we're also going to get in that house of yours on the 17th. So keep an eye open for that. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 7th house. And this is a place of one-on-one connections with other people, how you relate to other people. So this is going to be impacting your partnerships most strongly. You may feel that people are very demanding throughout this period of time. There's a lot of energy that you are putting into your connections, your relationships, and you're also going to be thinking about that quite a bit. And so there may be these moments where you feel the need to make a pivot within how you are relating to people or who you are connected to. And this could present itself as these major make or break moments where maybe someone is being very dramatic or very demanding or very conflictual, and you may need to cut some ties with people throughout this period of time. If not, then this is going to be speaking to matters of needing to be assertive with your boundaries and be clear with people about what you are and are not willing to kind of put up with. You may find that you are very triggered by other people or vice versa. You may be mirroring, you may be projecting with other people or vice versa. And so try to keep an eye on that as well. There's likely to be these issues of how people are making you feel or how you are making other people feel. And it may be very well worth thinking through how much of that is genuinely caused by the other and how much of it is probably needing to be the responsibility of one's own self. So when it comes to your frustrations with others, check in and see if there may be some internal frustration that is playing out in that connection. And I would assume that if someone is taking issue strongly with you, that may also be the case on the other side. So I wouldn't necessarily take the demanding, pushy, potentially demanding or conflictual aspect of this from other people super personally, but I would try to deal with it on as much of an up and up kind of a level as possible. And that may require having some pretty intense talks or really trying to get into what are people's expectations? What are you willing to put up with? What are you not? So aiming for clarity and honesty rather than getting an upper hand, because that's going to wind up blowing back. And you may even find that you're very frustrated in the moment with a connection and you feel like, I don't really care if this connection blows up. I'm just going to put forward my unadulterated, this is what I want, but it may be quite demanding and it might not actually be how you feel about something. Broadly speaking, it may just be a feeling that's really coming up in that moment. So try not to project that in a way where you feel the need to win in the moment, because that can wind up then breaking down a connection that you actually wanted to hold on to. Additionally, with Neptune in the mix, all of Mercury is in such an afflicted state here. So we're really not very clear about things. I do think that by the end of this, we probably do gain a lot more kind of weird, strange clarity on our connections through the thick of it, than we otherwise would have had. But throughout a lot of this, we're not very clear. And we could be idealizing or really building up partners, putting them on a pedestal or putting them in a position where they're not able to live up to that. And that can wind up causing some conflicts as well. And especially, there's a bit of a deceptive quality when Mercury is in the mix of both Mars and Saturn plus Neptune. So I would keep an eye open, not just for you self-deceiving about other people, but quite literally other people being somewhat deceptive throughout this period of time as well. So I would slow roll, especially any connections that seem to start around this point, particularly because we have a new moon that we're going to go into a lot more so in a couple weeks here when I do another video specifically about how this new moon is playing into all of this. I'll take that through sign by sign as well, but there may be someone that is introduced to you somehow that, and let me give you a timeline on that. I would say like from the beginning of April through mid-May, if there's a new person entering your life, I would slow roll the heck out of that and let them prove themselves to be very honest and straightforward before you just go all in on trusting, because this could be something of a test that's getting thrown your way of, oh, if something looks really shiny and it tells you all sorts of nice things, will you buy into it? Kind of a situation, you know. Try and stay grounded, try to take your time with any connections, but especially any new connections. Try not to self-deceive about your connections, and also keep a more keen than usual eye, maybe even a more distrustful eye than usual regarding what other people are telling you as well, because there could be a complicated issue that winds up coming up due to someone saying what they think that you want to hear in order to get you to do something maybe that they want for you to do, for instance. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you at this point, Libra. Like I said, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a bit of a reminder on all of this by focusing on the new moon in Aries that's going to be on the 17th of April. So do stay tuned for that. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your 6th house. So this is a place of your routines, your tasks, the things that you feel like you have to do, that you have to get done. A lot of our working life, the errands that we do, chores, show up in this place. But additionally, acute health considerations show up in this place as well. So this is going to have you focused very strongly on all of these areas. You may have this attitude, right, throughout this period of time of, I am just going to get as much done as I possibly can. I'm going to stay super focused and I'm going to finish all of my to-do lists. And that can be really wonderful, but you may feel like you're getting a bit overwhelmed by that. You may feel like not only are you trying to get all of your chores, your daily routine stuff, your responsibilities sorted out, but you may find that other people are kind of unloading more and more onto you throughout this period of time. And so there is a little bit of a risk here of burnout from all of that, even though you feel highly motivated to get all these things done and you want to see the end of that to-do list, right? When it comes to all of that, this may wind up forcing you to look at this differently and to shift how you're doing shift how you are doing your daily routine. So how much is actually your responsibility to take care of? Is there anything that you can delegate? Do other people feel like they can unload some of their responsibilities onto you? You may need to assert some boundaries around that, especially maybe within a work context or with like family chores where there can be a little bit of confusion as to whose duty it is to do what. There may be a little bit of drama or conflict that winds up coming up about whose responsibility is this to do. And you may find that in a lot of different aspects of your life that people are almost putting a lot of stuff on your plate. So I would really recommend keeping an eye on that, keeping an eye on your energy levels and asserting boundaries as calmly, but as firmly as you can through this period of time around what you're willing to do. What I would warn about is letting this problem that I'm describing here get out of hand such that you feel like you are bottling up the frustration around that until such a point that it winds up becoming an outburst about that, feeling so overwhelmed or so burnt out that you wind up kind of crashing out or something like that. So yeah, I would say try to address these things as soundly, as sustainably as you can, Try not to over schedule yourself, and try not to take too many of other people's responsibilities on your own self throughout this period of time. One of the good things about this is if you do wind up just overwhelmed with a lot of stuff to do, and it's not stuff that you can delegate, and it's not stuff where people are kind of being jerky or violating your boundaries or anything like that, is rising to the occasion such that you know that you can. So you may find yourself pushing yourself beyond what you would normally think that you're able to handle. And this can help you to get more used to that, or sharpening your ability to handle a lot of stuff at once, or potentially even like a crisis moment in the future, knowing that you can handle your time, manage your time in such a way that you're able to respond to a lot of things very rapidly. You may also find that you are pivoting when it comes to workplace or other life routine stuff, technologies. So maybe this is infusing AI into what you're doing, or using new devices or things like that. New approaches, so new like time management systems and things like that. And you may find that you're a little bit out of your depth with it in the beginning. I would just be as patient with yourself as possible. That's going to be more of a tall order than usual. You are less likely to have patience with yourself during this time, but try to give yourself as much grace about getting used to new tools, new technologies, new skills that you are working through throughout this period of time. Additionally, stuff that you even know how to do, that you are adept with, you may find yourself making ditzy mistakes and stuff like that. You may find yourself just like, I know how to do this. Why am I doing this wrong? Kinds of moments. Again, just be as patient with yourself as you can, because this Mercury is in a complicated space here where it's moving through Neptune and Mars and Saturn. And so it is very unclear. So that's where that lack of focus aspect winds up coming in. You may feel like there's a lot that you should be able to do, but that you're just like, the timing is off. Your ability to perceive your way through these issues is a little bit off. You may feel confused by things that you know how to do, etc. Now, finally, on a health level, this is also going to encourage you quite a bit to get on top of any sort of issues along those lines. Now, it may, if you have a specific health thing that you're working through, maybe a specific ache or pain that you've been not dealing with, or maybe there is some kind of regimen that you know you should be starting, but you haven't quite yet. This is going to give you a lot of motivation to that end. I would be cautious about doing what this is going to encourage you to do, which is, hey, I don't usually exercise, so let me go and do an hour of like hardcore stretching and exercise and stuff like that. And then you wind up laid up for like 3-4 days before you're able to get to, exercise again because you pulled certain muscles or overstrained yourself. So watch out for overstrain, watch out for overdoing it, going 0 to 100. You could even, like, if you had a dietary shift, sometimes the body reacts in a really strong way to suddenly taking away all of the junk food and going all in on a healthy kind of a situation. So I would say be as patient as you can. Try to ease through these situations. That should be a better way of going about it, because that no nonsense approach is likely to come in pretty hardcore, and bodies don't often respond to that super well. So try to be structured about it. Try to stay motivated. Try not to give yourself excuses and outs and things like that, but do try to be gentle with yourself as you are easing into new regimens. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you right now. I am going to look at this from the perspective specifically of the new moon that we have coming up in this area as well. That new moon is going to be on the 17th. I'm going to put that video out in a couple of weeks here. So stay tuned for that. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have this stellium in Aries taking place in your 5th house. So this is a place of your joys, your passions, your creativity. This is also a place of children, but this is really going to be stirring up all of your natural Sagittarian kind of tendencies to get excited about things, to want to go on adventures, to want to be bold, to want to, just kind of fly by the seat of your pants and make big risky decisions and have them pay off in hilarious ways, etc. So this is going to be lighting a fire under you along those lines. So as I'm sure you know, sometimes that can get a little bit out of hand, and this kind of would. So it's going to be a bit of a need to make sure that that's sustainable while not putting a wet blanket on all of that, because it is a really lovely potential energy to be working with. So I would expect a huge amount of inspiration in any sort of creative hobbies or interests that you have. It doesn't just have to be like painting or rugby or whatever. It can be a topic that you really love to study or something that just kind of fills you up with excitement. This can be redecorating or anything that brings the magic and inspiration back into your life that really feels like this is why we live, you know, this is what we live for. So any sort of passion projects or just passions generally speaking, even like going out and having fun, this is going to be really encouraging a huge amount of that and inspiring you and motivating you to go after that through this period of time. So with all of this energy here, it is weirdly well attuned for this house to get something great out of it, which is literally some creative form, like creating something and bringing it into form. So yeah, any sort of interests, hobbies, if you are literally producing something from that, this is going to give you the imagination. It's going to give you the focus. It's going to give you the motivation to make something real out of that. So that is super, super cool. Actually making something tangible out of joy or creativity. Maybe this is even bringing friend groups together. Maybe what you are creating here is an event or a party for people to come together and have some fun. Infuse a little bit of magic, not only into your own life, but into that of loved ones as well. Just having a really wonderful time. That said, I do have at the end here this little warning about mind-altering substances. Overdoing it on substances really of any sort, I would caution around with this, because it would be really easy to overdo stuff on that front. But yeah, this passion, intensity, when it comes to people that you love, this could even be like people that you really enjoy interacting with and finding so much more pleasure in just chatting people up that are fun or connecting with family, loved ones, friends, people like that. Your children, you're likely to have a lot of motivation to fuel or rather funnel a lot of your energy and your excitement into their projects as well and really build them up and encourage them. You may though come off as a little bit overbearing. So that is something maybe to keep in mind with your kids or with loved ones. You may come off very strong throughout this time. So the steady approach, the kind of more regulated, calm approach to this, trying to apply this energy more evenly across the board rather than going from 0 to 100 the moment that that passion really wells up within you. I think that's probably going to be the better way to go about this for all of us. And for you, I hate to say, don't put a wet blanket on this, but I would say you're likely to go a little bit overboard with this, you know. Also, when it comes to your own inner child, that's going to weave into a lot of this. So when it comes to your creativity, when it comes to your inspiration, wanting to have a little bit more magic and whimsy in your life and those of others, planning events, trying to get people together, connecting with loved ones, just enjoying life. Feeding your inner child as a part of that, I think, would also be wonderful. But if you are also really motivated to spend a lot of time with your children or children that are around you, nieces, nephews, just kids that you know, friends' kids, whatever it is, you may find that you're able to get a lot out of that as well by just leaning into that childlike nature of yourself as well. But yeah, all sorts of risky, bold moves are going to be encouraged by this. So do that with a bit of a measured sense of how you're going to go about that for sure. I wouldn't be doing stuff like speeding, you know, you're probably going to do so regardless of whether I tell you not to, but I would avoid danger. I would avoid recklessness. Also, there could be some drama that gets stirred up within friends or loved ones as well. So you may be dealing with something of a high conflict personality around you. That can be a serious wet blanket to something where your enthusiasm winds up encouraging someone with a high conflict personality themselves to go way overboard and kind of killing the fun or killing the buzz in that way. So yeah, I would keep an eye open for that kind of thing. Maybe don't invite those kinds of people if you're going to have an event or something like this. Your kids may even have a little bit of drama where you're needing to teach them about boundaries and teach them how to assert those boundaries and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is going to be, I think, more fun for you than it is for a lot of people. And I think even a bit less problematic as long as you're able to keep your own impulses in check here. As long as you are not doing super crazy stuff just on a whim, this should go over quite well. So I'm going to talk about this as well in a couple of weeks from the perspective of the new moon that's going to be coming up in the mix of all of this as well. So keep an eye open for that. And until then, I do hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have this big Aries stellium taking place in your fourth house. This is the place of your roots, your past, your family, and home situation. So you're likely to have a huge amount of focus on that area of your life in this period of time. Now, this could be highly motivating to notice all of the little things that you've been wanting to do around the house that maybe you've been putting off, or maybe these are even things that you haven't really noticed, but that are getting stirred up in you of, I want to change that, I want to work on that. So I would not be surprised if there's a bunch of DIY projects, if there's renovations, which include contractors, if there is a big move coming up, if you are getting the kind of final stir to decide, I want to move to a completely different place, and maybe I need to think about selling this property or doing something with this property and maybe buying another. There's a huge amount of stirring that's going on in this area. So I would expect for you to be doing a lot along those lines. One thing I would say, if you are dealing with contractors, if you are dealing with major renovations, if you're doing something where like, okay, I need to tear this out before I can fix it, think that through, take your time with that. Maybe contractors themselves may run into some delays. There may be some things that break in the meantime. Having both malefics in the mix, having that Neptune there as well, you may even wind up discovering, okay, this foundation isn't quite as good as I thought it was through the process of some work that you're doing. Structural complications could wind up coming into the mix for sure. But again, this is going to encourage you to try to fix all of this stuff. That's what it's really going to want to do. And not only on that structural home space level, but also on a familial level. So where are all the cracks in the foundation? Where are all the complications within your familial situation with your family or your lineage? Any sort of baggage, any sort of responsibilities that you have with regard to your family. This is going to have you wanting to just kind of get on top of it and get it done. So on the one hand, if you do have a lot of responsibilities, you'll probably be knocking those out left and right here. They may feel extra heavy. They may feel like, okay, I'm running into all these little obstacles that are just kind of making this all a little bit more annoying. Maybe people aren't ready when you're doing something for them, or maybe this is like picking people up and taking them places, and yet you run into like every red light and it winds up taking longer than you're expecting or something like this. So those responsibilities, you may just have some extra obstacles that you need to deal with. It'll test your patience, but it'll also teach you a little bit more patience with all of that as well. You may feel very put upon by family, hopefully not like judged, but that could also be the case. If that's coming up, then there's probably going to be a big thing here about boundaries and a sense of belonging when it comes to your family. Your family shouldn't be making you feel bad about who you are if you're not like big time screwing up, right? So if that is the case, then I would question that, and I would be as gentle with yourself as you can about that. Get yourself into a headspace where you're more regulated, and then maybe try to verbally address that and draw those lines and things like that. But when it comes to baggage too, so what is your lineage? Is there any sort of generational trauma that you've been dealing with? This could help you to really get on top of that. This could be like, okay, I'm finally going to see that person that helps with addressing some sort of like family line trauma and healing, things like that, energy healing with your family line, or addressing trauma from your parents, or addressing the trauma of your parents. Maybe your grandparents were not so nice to your parents and you are helping your parents through that and saying, look, we actually need to address this rather than sweeping it under the rug all the time, and helping them through that as well. There's this sense of when Mars and Saturn get together, especially in Aries, they're going to want to get things done quickly. So they're going to be pretty no nonsense about stuff, but they may rush into things. So if you can, like for instance, if you're in that situation where you're trying to help a parent with something that they're dealing with, do try and be kind of patient with them. That's going to be kind of lacking in the situation. So it won't hurt to lean pretty heavily into patience when it comes to all these things, especially emotional considerations. There's a little bit of emotion here, but there's a lot of no nonsense. And so, yeah, I just kind of wouldn't lay the hammer down too much if feelings and stuff like that are on the line. Now, also drama potentially within your family, a lot of hyperactivity, ton of stuff to do, some friction though, conflictual kind of nature and energy around the home and within your family. If there's a high conflict personality within your family, I would expect for them to be pretty extra throughout this period of time. So you might even want to avoid that a bit if you can. You're probably going to have these moments where you're like, no, I just need to go all in and just deal with it right now, because that's how the energy is going to be flowing. But from April through mid-May, if you have quite literally a high conflict personality in your family and you're dealing with them, they're likely to be really, really, really overbearing. So be warned, right? They may even be kind of deceptive. So I would watch out for any sort of woe is me kinds of stories within your family. There's likely way more to that story than what you are being presented with. This Mercury is super afflicted in this spot. It is very unclear when it is beset by Neptune and Mars and Saturn here. So people within your family could quite literally be lying or deceptive about what's actually going on with situations. So again, another great reason to take your time with jumping to conclusions about things. Additionally, when it comes to, do I feel secure? Do I feel like I belong? How do I feel within my core? This is also going to be bringing a lot of focus and energy to that. It might be making that an extra sore spot or extra apparent to you so that you will deal with it. Again, I can only recommend like trying to find people who are able to do therapies or you know, even on YouTube, there's all sorts of meditations and things along those lines. Try to be patient, gentle with yourself about all of this. If you feel like you have become disconnected from other people, reaching out, connecting with people that feel like family, I think that that should be pretty wonderful. But it may feel a bit elusive, and the reason for that is that Neptune is in the mix here. So you may feel like I feel unrooted somehow, or I feel untethered where I am somehow. And you may feel like I feel like something's missing. But what's weird about that is that might not actually really be true. It kind of might just be a feeling that you're feeling. You know, Neptune can be kind of weird in that way. And even our own feelings, even our own core might be deceiving us a little bit with what it's bringing up. And it may be too negativistic or too fearful or too much leaning into the complications when the imagination that is coming up from your core has both of the malefics in a pretty hardcore sign coming up, right? So this could be a story that you're telling yourself about being an outsider, being, you know, a renegade, needing to like go it alone because I don't belong anywhere and blah, blah, blah. And it's like deep down, you might know that that's not really true, but you might be spinning that tale for yourself. So I wouldn't lean too hard into any sort of negation stories about your origin or about your sense of belonging or security, basically. Also, when it comes to any sort of immovable property, I would be practicing a lot of care, a lot of patience. You'll probably want, if it's contractors, if it is selling property, if it is buying property, if it has to do with tenants or landlords or anything like that, big stuff, unless something's breaking and you need to deal with it, which could be the case. I would, anything that's optional, see if maybe you can just not do it not initiate until about mid-May. That way we can at least get one of those malefics out of the situation here. By that time, then Mars will have moved on, and this place then gets to settle down a little bit. If you have to do stuff, I would be reading everything. Make sure you are 100% clear. Get everything in writing, because someone could say something here. You may believe them, and then they say something else. So if you can get it in writing, all the better. Because then it's right there in black and white and they can't spin a different story, a couple weeks down the line or anything like that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you for now. I am going to be addressing this from the perspective of the new moon that's coming up here quite shortly in a couple weeks after we touch on Uranus and Gemini again. We're going to come back. I'm going to remind everyone that this is what April looks like here. And we'll look at this from the idea of like new starts and things like that. So stay tuned for that. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have the Aries Stellium taking place in your third house. This is the place of your mind and your daily life, your everyday life, your communications, your connections, your community, your siblings, peers, neighbors, your connection to your neighborhood. Transit shows up here as well. Technologies can show up here. So you are likely to feel so busy throughout April and May. So one of the things off the bat that I would recommend here is try not to overschedule yourself on the front end of this, because you're probably going to find that throughout this period of time, there's more and more and more that winds up coming up. So leave yourself open, give yourself that time and space to take on the stuff that has to get done that winds up cropping up right in the middle of the month, things like that. So you're likely to just feel a bit overburdened by all the stuff that you're needing to get done. You'll probably feel very motivated as well, but it's going to be a bit of a push and pull between feeling very motivated to get things done and feeling burnt out and like you don't want to do any of it. You may even find yourself getting kind of angry or having negative thoughts about what's going on and what's expected of you. And if you let that out verbally when you are hot, like in that moment, you could wind up saying some things that you wind up regretting as well. So I wouldn't bottle up any sort of time frame or expectations placed upon you, frustrations, until it reaches that point. And if you do reach that point, I would take yourself out of the situation physically for a moment, emotionally regulate, and then come back with a game plan on how you are going to speak about the situation. Because you could accidentally wind up making the situation worse by speaking too strongly about the situation, right? So you're likely to have a ton of emails that you're needing to deal with, a ton of tasks, a bunch of errands, and just feel super, super busy. Now, that may be in part lots of boring tasks plus lots of fun tasks. So try and balance that out. There may be a lot of community events that you're wanting to go to. If you are in the Northern Hemisphere and it's springtime, you may find yourself like, oh, I want to go to this market and I want to go to this thing and that thing. And there's all these like festivals or whatever it is. So try to balance that out so that you are able to do the fun things so that the pressure doesn't build up with like all work and no play. And then you wind up, maybe blowing up at someone or something like that. Now, additionally, your voice, let's come back to that real quick, actually. It's going to be extra strong through this period of time. So you can utilize that in a wonderful way if you are a writer or you need to speak up for someone, for yourself, for a cause, for some sort of like creative or professional reason. You can really make a huge impression and have a lot of influence and impact with your voice. So whether it be writing or literally speaking, whether it be like community advocacy or sharing your opinions and your viewpoints on certain things, speaking your mind, you are likely to do that with so much more oomph. So try to work that into the equation when you're just regular times talking to people kind of thing. Because like, for instance, if you are in line and waiting for something and you say, hey, I've been waiting here for a while. Do you know when, blah, blah, blah. It could come off as, why are you so slow? This is really dumb. I don't like this, kind of thing. So even if you're not trying to communicate in that way, you may trigger people more with your voice than you think that you will, or than you usually would. So try to, again, just add that into the equation there and maybe take it down a notch whenever you feel like you may accidentally step on someone's toes. Try to be extra polite. Now, this is going to be working up a lot of motivation, so you may feel like you really want to clarify certain areas. You want to organize your life more. You want to start a new project or commit yourself to a course of learning or some travel or some like getting deeper involved with your community kinds of projects. So I wouldn't say not to do that, but you may wind up going all in very strongly in such a way that isn't the most sustainable. So try to pace yourself with that. You could get super excited about certain projects or, again, a course, a class, an author, and you may want to read everything that they have written, and you may wind up missing some tasks, that you meant to do because you're so wrapped up in those books or something like that. So yeah, this is a very much an all-in kind of an energy, but it's going to need to pace itself if it wants to stay sustainable. So again, yeah, we addressed boundaries. You may need to bring that up. You may need to speak that. But again, try to do so from an emotionally regulated place. And that would be more likely to come up either when it comes to communications or regular, like acquaintances that you deal with on a day-to-day level. Siblings or neighbors are the people that most often show up in this place. Now, finally, as well, with Mars and Saturn here, you could find yourself in a position, or at least very, very, very motivated to seek out a position of leadership within your community. So this could even be an urge coming up of, why don't I run for office here in town and pursue that and try to do something good for the community based on my views of what we need here. Advocating along those lines, or leading a community organization, or really stepping in to something that your community is needing, and trying to organize people and voices toward that kind of end. So if you feel very motivated to do that, that is excellent. But again, I'm going to come back to the same advice. Pace yourself with that. Try and make sure that what you're doing is sustainable and that you can keep that up. And also, I wouldn't let minor setbacks and things like that get in your way when it comes to things that you're motivated to do. Because with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, it's going to be a bit stop and go, but that doesn't mean stay stopped, right? But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius, with this so far. We are going to come back and look at this in a couple weeks because we have this energy going on so long. I want to look at this also from the perspective of this new moon and remind us of this energy. So we'll talk about this again in a couple of weeks from a bit of a different angle. And until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have the stellium in Aries taking place in your second house. So this is the place of your own personal resources and values. So this is kind of across the board. It is literal in the sense of the possessions that you own, the investments that you have, your income, your finances, your budgets, as well as what you value, how much value you place on things, and the value that you bring into certain equations through your skills and so forth, your talents and so forth. But it can also be a little bit more esoteric of like your energetic resources, your time resources, what you value on a kind of spiritual level, what is truly important and a priority to you. So this is going to be bringing your attention to these matters on both literal and kind of esoteric levels, I'm sure. So this can have you really looking at your budgets, your financial situation, your income, your debts, your assets, what you own, evaluating all of that and trying to size that up. You may feel very, very, very motivated to get on top of that, basically, to be in control of that and to exercise direct control over these things. So excellent for creating a budget. But one thing I would say about this is you are probably going to feel like, where do I have this? Oh, it's just the next one here. Push-pull between wanting to spend versus save. Now, you may feel like, okay, I'm on top of my finances. I know where I stand, and I know that I have this amount that I don't need to grasp onto. So let me just blow it, versus you may look at that and be like, hey, what if I were to double that? And how cool would that be? And then going all in on saving. So this is going to be a kind of 0 to 100 as well as a all in or all out, kind of an energy. It's going to be so kind of forceful of an energy, very impatient. And so I would say try to pay attention to sustainability. If you find yourself in a decent situation, maybe don't be spending everything, but maybe have a certain percentage more and more that you're wanting to kind of pull into savings or something like that. Try to really focus on the long term and what is going to, for instance, when you are spending, ask yourself those questions of, does this increase my quality of life? And for how long? What is the longevity of the value of this? Rather than what Mars is going to wind up encouraging to some extent is this going to make me feel good right now? So ask yourself those kinds of questions, maybe give yourself a little patience. Now, that isn't saying that we shouldn't ever blow money on stuff that's just kind of stupid and fun to do in the moment. But Saturn's going to wind up kicking back a little bit if you get too much into that mode. It may even wind up throwing a big expense that you weren't expecting at you so that you pay more attention to that kind of thing. So yeah, sustainability, try and stay at an even keel, but getting on top of this is absolutely wonderful, especially knowing exactly where you're at with everything. Additionally, there could be this real push and urge to be super self-sufficient and relying solely upon yourself and knowing that you can. That's something that is remotely new to you. This is going to get super excited about that. This is a very independent kind of an energy. So as you're redefining what is truly valuable to you, those kinds of more abstract or esoteric or feeling kinds of aspects of this could wind up coming in where it's like, what do I really value? I value being able to call my own shots in my own life and not have to worry about fitting into someone else's boxes so that I'm not rocking myself financially if I decide to step outside of that or not meet those expectations outside of me. So independence may be a major aspect here, or wanting to feel like you are completely in charge, not only of your finances, but of your life overall, and so that could be a hugely motivating force to all of this as well. But maybe as well, what's truly valuable to you is being able to help others and being able to put yourself in a position to be able to do that. What's important here is that you're able to define that on your own terms. So what is valuable to you? Root that in you, not in what you think other people value, not in what you think that other people expect from you. Nothing like that. This is about coming truly back to what you value, especially about yourself and your own life. Now, this may also encourage you to renegotiate maybe your income, maybe the level of recognition that you have, maybe your title or something like this within a working context as well. So this will help to motivate to that end. That said, I certainly couldn't guarantee with both of the malefics involved here that you would get the response that you are wanting right now. So it may be wise to draft up out of this motivation a game plan about what you're expecting in return for what you're putting out there in any kind of context. Recheck it, come back to it, make sure that it's very sound. Look at all of the different options that you have available to you if there's a disappointment on the other side of that negotiation, and then try to approach it from a very steady, sustainable kind of a perspective, So if you do face pushback, it might not be worth just like continuing to kind of push against that wall. If you find that you have been pouring your time, your energy, your effort, or your finances into something that is not worth what you're putting out there to you, this could be you very much identifying that energetic or resource leakage and then needing to address it. Just again, try to make sure that you are as emotionally regulated as you can as you are addressing or negotiating anything through this period of time. And keep an eye on the long term when it comes to all of this. Additionally, with all of that motivation that you have toward these ends of maybe being independent and increasing your finances, increasing your resources, or maybe saving up for some specific thing that you're really wanting, This could have you highly motivated on a work level too. So you could wind up putting a huge amount of dedicated effort either into a job that you already have and therefore getting more out of it, especially if you work with clients or on commissions or things like that. You may find that you are very financially motivated during this time through all of that. But you may also find that you are, for instance, keeping a job that you have while you are redoubling your efforts toward an independent project or a side hustle or a gig or something like that, either solely for the financial gain or for a long-term goal that you have about becoming financially independent and not needing to have whatever the job is that seems to be the sustainable source of income. What I would not recommend doing under this energy is like quickly deciding to quit a job or something like that. That would kind of be the worst way that you could go about this, because that would be hitting on all of the potential downsides of this, as being rash, running into a wall due to that rashness, and making decisions that are not completely sound. So I would avoid that kind of thing. Try to really focus on sustainability and the long term. And if you do so and you follow through on that, and you're not going like 0 to 100 to 0 to 100, then you should be able to build out a really wonderful game plan to get yourself into a really wonderful financial position from the seed of this major motivation that you have around this period of time. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you for now, Pisces. I am going to be looking at this in a couple of weeks from the perspective of this new moon that we're going to have in Aries in the midst of all of this as well. So stay tuned for that. But until then, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.